Putin's last hope is gone. Russia didn't lose this war on the battlefield. It lost it in the supply chain. Moscow is now paying billions of dollars in cash to North Korea, not for advanced weapons, not for modern systems, but for decades-old artillery shells pulled from dusty stockpiles. So ask yourself one question: what kind of great power has to buy survival from a pariah state? Because this isn't an alliance. It's a dependence Russia can no longer escape. And once it began, Moscow lost the ability to walk away. Today, we take you inside that moment. Not the version being sold to the public, but the one the Kremlin never wanted exposed. Russia is burning ammunition faster than it can replace it. Its industrial base can no longer keep up. When a nuclear power has to wire money to a sanctioned dictatorship just to keep firing, the system has already failed. Russia is losing a war it was never designed to fight. Not because its soldiers can't advance, but because its factories can't keep up. Modern artillery warfare isn't decided by bravery or tactics. It's decided by one equation: burn rate versus build rate. Russia is firing more than 10,000 artillery shells per day. That pace requires a military-industrial system operating at full capacity without interruption, without sanctions, and without technological gaps. Russia no longer has that system. Sanctions didn't just restrict money. They removed microchips, machine tools, precision bearings, chemical propellants, and maintenance software, the invisible components modern production depends on. As a result, Russia's ammunition factories aren't producing at scale anymore. They're cannibalizing old stockpiles, refurbishing shells designed decades ago, and cutting corners that artillery systems do not forgive. This isn't a temporary slowdown. It's a structural failure. You can't surge production when the machines that make the machines no longer function. You can't replace Western tooling with improvisation. And you can't fight a high-intensity war on recycled inventory forever. That failure leads directly to the most revealing decision of the war. Russia didn't choose North Korea. It was forced there. At first, Moscow tried to disguise the collapse. The relationship with Pyongyang was framed as a strategic exchange: food, fuel, and political support in return for ammunition. A barter system. That phase is over. North Korea is no longer accepting favors or promises. It is demanding cash billions of dollars in direct payment for what remains of its ammunition. Stockpiles. That shift is the real signal. Barter implies partnership. Cash implies leverage. Kim Jong-un has calculated Russia's desperation and priced it accordingly. Every shipment of shells now represents money leaving Moscow's reserves with nothing productive, coming back in return. These aren't modern munitions. They're aging shells stored for decades, often unreliable, often unsafe. But Russia has no alternative. China won't sell lethal aid. Domestic production can't scale. And the battlefield burn rate doesn't pause for diplomacy. So the Kremlin pays. This isn't trade. It's extortion made possible by systemic failure. And once a war machine begins paying cash just to maintain basic firing capability, the balance of power has already inverted. Russia is no longer setting terms. It is meeting them. And this is where the damage stops being visible and starts becoming permanent. Every payment doesn't stabilize the system, it weakens it. Reserves shrink, options disappear, flexibility dies. The war doesn't get cheaper, it gets more expensive, month by month. Inside Moscow, this shift triggered quiet alarms. Not public panic, private math. How long can reserves last at this burn rate? How many months can survival be purchased before the vault runs dry? That's when dependence turns toxic, because the supplier now controls the clock. This is where the situation becomes irreversible. Once Russia began paying cash for survival, it crossed a strategic threshold it cannot walk back from. Because dependence compounds. Each shipment from North Korea doesn't stabilize the system, it weakens it. Every payment drains reserves meant to cushion sanctions, stabilize the ruble, and fund the domestic economy. And Korea understands this perfectly. When one side cannot fight without the other's supply, leverage shifts permanently. Prices rise. Shipments slow. Conditions are added. Russia is no longer buying ammunition. It's buying time. and time is getting more expensive. This creates a silent escalation loop. Today it's cash. Tomorrow it could be technology, intelligence access, or strategic concessions Moscow swore it would never make. That's the trap. A great power doesn't collapse when it loses a battle. It collapses when it loses autonomy over its own survival. And Russia has just outsourced that survival to the most unpredictable regime on the planet. What makes this collapse even more dangerous is the silence from Beijing. China has the factories. It has the stockpiles. It has the logistics. Yet it refuses to provide lethal aid. That refusal isn't neutrality. It's strategy. A Russia forced to beg North Korea for shells is weak, controllable, and cheap. Every billion Moscow sends to Pyongyang is a billion Beijing doesn't have to spend while still collecting discounted oil, discounted gas, and strategic leverage without risk. If China believed Russia could still reset the system, it would intervene. It hasn't. Because Beijing isn't betting on Russian recovery anymore. It's betting on controlled exhaustion. A desperate Russia isn't a challenger. It's a buffer. This is how great powers fall out of the game without being defeated through silence. And while Moscow keeps paying to stay alive, Beijing quietly positions itself for what comes after. Now the system begins to eat itself. Russia is no longer choosing strategy. It is reacting to shortages. Every week, the burn rate accelerates. More shells fired, more cash drained, more leverage handed away. But nothing replaces what's being lost. There is no surge capacity, no hidden factories, no replacement cycle. So the Kremlin does the only thing left. It pays whatever is demanded today, even if that guarantees collapse tomorrow. Survival becomes the strategy. And once survival becomes the strategy, recovery becomes impossible. Normalization sets in. Emergency decisions become routine. Dependency becomes policy. Paying billions for scrap-era ammunition starts to feel normal. But it isn't control. It's decay, learning how to breathe. And then comes the hard limit. Logistics isn't flexible. It's mathematical. A system either produces enough to sustain itself or it doesn't. Russia is now past that line. Shipments arrive late. Supplies drip instead of flow. Consumption permanently outruns delivery. That's the logistical heart attack. One day the guns fire. The next day, they don't. No announcement. No retreat order. Just silence where artillery used to be. This isn't how fronts collapse, it's how they starve. And once artillery continuity breaks, everything else follows. Infantry freezes. Armor stalls. Air support pulls back. Not because the enemy attacked, but because the supply line stopped answering. This is the deadline Moscow is racing toward. Not Ukraine, not NATO, but the moment the system simply stops. And when that happens, there is no payment big enough to fix it. This is where the illusion finally breaks. Russia isn't fighting a war anymore. It's financing one on someone else's terms. Every shipment from North Korea isn't just ammunition. It's a receipt. Proof that Moscow no longer controls the most basic requirement of modern warfare. Russia has been here before. Not in this form, not with these actors, but with the same fatal pattern. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union didn't collapse because NATO invaded or because an enemy broke through the front. It collapsed because the system kept spending to sustain an illusion it could no longer afford. Wars were financed, subsidies were paid, factories stayed open. On paper, everything still functioned. But behind closed doors, the math stopped working. Supply officers waited for deliveries that never arrived. Regional commanders improvised because the center couldn't respond. Salaries were delayed, then partially paid, then quietly canceled. The state didn't announce failure, it drifted into it. By the time the public understood what was happening, the system had already hollowed itself out. There was no single breaking moment, just a quiet realization that the center could no longer sustain the periphery. That is the echo we are hearing again. Not collapse by defeat, but collapse by exhaustion. What happens next won't look like defeat. There will be no surrender speech, no dramatic retreat. Instead, the system will start missing deadlines. Ammunition deliveries arrive late. Fuel allocations get quietly reduced. Units are told to hold position not because of strategy, but because resupply hasn't. arrived. On paper, the war continues. On the ground, momentum evaporates. This is how wars enter the danger zone. Not when armies lose ground, but when logistics stop answering the phone. A state that cannot supply its own army doesn't fall suddenly. It decays. Quietly, expensively, irreversibly. The Kremlin can still control headlines. It can still project strength, but it cannot hide this reality. A nuclear power is wiring billions in cash to a sanctioned dictatorship for decades old. Ammunition just to keep the front from collapsing. That isn't strategy. That's survival mode. And survival mode has a clock. The longer this dependency continues, the deeper the leverage shifts away from Moscow. And the harder the fall becomes when the money finally runs out. The real danger isn't the moment the money runs out. It's the moment before that, when Moscow starts making decisions it knows it can't afford, but makes them anyway. That's when systems don't fail loudly. They fail quietly. Payments get delayed. Shipments get smaller. Promises get thinner. And the center holds until it suddenly doesn't. The real question now isn't who wins this war. It's what breaks first. The treasury? The supply line? Or the political control holding it all together? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want to see what's really happening before the world admits it, like the video and subscribe. We don't chase narratives. We track where power actually breaks. Stay sharp. Thanks for watching.